If you haven't heard yet, I just launched Future of Work Leaders, a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you are interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Again, that is futureofworkleaders.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of the Future Ready Leadership Podcast. We are very quickly approaching the end of the year. We have the holidays upon us. And I thought now would be a good time to reflect back on some of the best episodes that we've had from 2024. So what you're going to listen to in just a couple seconds here is going to be a collection of clips from some of the most popular episodes that we have had for this year. You're going to hear from folks like Guy Kawasaki, Dr. Amy Edmondson, and John R. Miles. And each clip will probably be around 10 to 15 minutes, really focused on a key leadership insight from 2024. And these are probably things that you may have missed during the year. So with that being said, our first segment features Guy Kawasaki. And in this first clip, he's going to be talking about the power of having a growth mindset. He draws a lot on his rich experiences and lessons learned, whether it's from Apple or from entrepreneurs or from the various businesses that he's been a part of. And he really outlines this idea of how embracing continuous learning and resiliency can drive exceptional leadership. So let's jump right into this first clip from Guy Kawasaki.
You know, the mother of the growth mindset is Carol Dweck. So I start off with, her thoughts. She was on the podcast. She is a friend of mine. And before I knew her personally, there were two books in my life that forced a lot of growth on me. One is If You Want to Write by Brenda Ullin. And the second one is Mindset by Carol Dweck. And so If You Want to Write, my wife gave to me as I was writing my very first book, The Macintosh Way. This is back in 1987. And at the time, I think like many young people, you have doubts like, I'm not a PhD in English. I'm not trained to be a writer. I've never written a book before. Can I really write a book? And the whole point of Brenda Ullin's book is if you want to write. Don't listen to what other people have to say. Don't ask for permission. Don't even listen to your own negativity. So that was book number one. And then book number two, I read a few years after that, which was Mindset by Carol Dweck. And the growth mindset means that, you believe you can learn, you believe you can grow, you can acquire new skills, that failure is learning. The fixed mindset, most people fixate on the negative part of the fixed mindset, which means I'm not good at physics. I'll never be good at physics. I'm not going to even try physics. So that's a fixed mindset. I've been given certain talents. I've not been given other talents and abilities, and I'm stuck. Yeah. I may be good at math, but I'm not good at surfing. The other part of the fixed mindset is sometimes when you are very talented, you get a fixed mindset in a overly positive way, and you don't want to risk your reputation nor self-image. So let's say, since you were a kid, people were telling you, oh, you're so smart, you're so good in music, you're such a natural, you're a prodigy, blah, blah, blah. And so you don't want to risk embarrassment or failure by trying something besides music. So the fixed mindset can also box in people who are very successful and don't want to try anything else. And, I sort of really came to this because of sports, really. So I took up ice hockey at 44, and I took up surfing at 60. And let's just say those are not the ideal ages to take up either sport. And I swear, it really was because of the growth mindset of Carol Dweck that I said, you're 60, even though you're from Hawaii, you never surfed before in your life. Your daughter's taking it up. Why don't you take it up too? let's just say most people don't take up surfing at 60 or hockey at 44.
Yeah, no, that's true. But somehow you managed to do both, right? I think even on Instagram, I follow you on Instagram or on Twitter. I see you frequently put up some of the pictures and the videos of you surfing out there, which are a lot of fun to see. But from a lot of the guests that you've interviewed, and by the way, I'm a big believer in the growth mindset as well. Yeah, even when I've written my books on leadership, a lot of the times when I interview CEOs, they credit the growth mindset as one of the most important elements of their leadership success.
Yeah.
But do you have any examples of maybe some of the guests that you've interviewed and how that growth mindset actually played a role in helping them become remarkable?
Well, this answer is going to be long and it's going to veer off on a tangent for a while. Okay. So as I've interviewed these people, I noticed that there's sort of two general patterns. One is you fall in love with animals very young and you stick with that for the next 90 years. That's Jane Goodall. Fell in love with animals, went to Africa, became this expert in chimpanzees and has been a biology, ecology evangelist for 90 years. But then I also noticed people who made like complete and utter career changes or life changes. I mean, I have several people who were serving in prison and became respiratory therapists, became authors, became artists. One person in my book named Halim Flowers at 17 was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for murder. He got out because of the law change and he became an artist and a writer and a speaker. So I also noticed, there's the Janes and then these other people. And so I would say, there's one of the things I think remarkable people do is that they can hold 2 conflicting thoughts in their head. So one thought is you gut it out, you stick with it, you don't give up no matter what happens. That's the Jane Goodall story. The other story is more like Silicon Valley, quick flip, fail fast, all those venture capital isms.
Yep.
And that's completely opposite. And so you have to hold 2 thoughts in your head because both can work. And sometimes people use one method, sometimes people use another method. Now, the rat hole I want to go down here is that I want, great examples in my book. And believe it or not, finding a great example is not so easy because it has to be an example that a significant portion of people recognize, but not so common that it's like everybody's heard of it, not interesting anymore. And I would say maybe an example of one that's so used is Art Fry making Post-it pads at 3 a.m., right? So every time you hear a story about unintended consequence and, letting 100 flowers bloom, Art Fry, 3 a.m. So I go to ChatGPT and I say, give me examples of people who made radical changes in their careers and were successful. And 10 seconds later, ChatGPT spits out, Jeff Bezos and a bunch of others. And one of them is Julia Child. I said, Julia Child. So now, at least old boomers realize Julia Child, the French cook, the French chef, the art of French cooking.
I know a lot about her. She was in my one of my previous books as well.
Oh, really? Okay. So I don't know if you know this, but Julia Child, until her mid-30s, was working for the OSS, which is today's CIA.
Yep.
And in the her mid-30s, she got married to another OSS person, and they moved to France, and that's where she was introduced to French cooking.
Yeah.
So Julia Child basically went from spook to chef.
I learned something really crazy today. 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed to the channel. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It'll help the channel grow, and you'll also get notified when new videos just like this one on leadership are available. And now, let's get back to the content. Do you know the story about how she first learned when she was in the OSS, her first role as far as like making ingredients?
Well, the story I heard is she was working on something to make sure that porpoises don't explode anti-submarine mines.
Sharks.
So maybe there's another one.
No. It was
sharks.
Yeah,
sharks,
that's exactly right. She was. From what I remember, she wanted to go in the army, and she was told that she was too tall because I think she was 6'2". And so she was in the OSS, and she was tasked with creating some sort of a mixture, a concoction that they could put into the water that would keep sharks from detonating explosives that were designed for underwater German U-boats. And so that was kind of her first foray into cooking. And yeah, I love that story a lot because I have her in my book. I mention her in a lot of my talks as well. She's a really fantastic story. To go from that into cooking. There's a popular show about her. I think it's on Apple TV now, that came out fairly recently too. But yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. I get excited when I hear Julia Child because she's a fantastic.
So here's so people understand the complexities of writing. So I'm 69. I know who Julia Child is. I know you're not 69, but you know who Julia Child is. But if you went to most Gen Z in high school or college and say, do you know who Julia Child is? They would say, never heard of her.
Yeah.
Right. And I tell a story in my book of Christy Yamaguchi about, grit, which is the next section. So Christy Yamaguchi in her first figure skating contest finished 12th. Okay. 12th. Now she became gold medal winner, world champion. And so, the lesson there is it's not where you start, it's where you end. Yeah. So I put that example in the book, and I let this high school teacher read the draft. And she says to me, Guy, you have Julia Child and Christy Yamaguchi. None of my students know who that is. Yeah.
Well,
I was amazed.
Yeah, the crazy thing is, you imagine a time where it's not going to be that far along where people are not even going to know who Steve Jobs is.
Yes.
Right? Because he died, in 2012? And so I would imagine, and I have a daughter and a son. My son is going to be turning 4. My daughter's going to be turning 8. When if I were to go to them obviously now and say, who's Steve Jobs, they're not going to have any clue. But chances are, for the majority of their lives, they're not going to know who Steve Jobs was unless, of course, I explain to them and tell them. And it's one of the things that I'm personally trying to get better at. Like even right now, I'm trying to read history books. I'm trying to go back in time because one of my big regrets is that I didn't spend enough time studying and understanding history and key figures, whether it's presidents or business leaders or anything like that. So now I'm going back and trying to read up on that for precisely that reason, because it's how the world was built. It's how business gets done. So many things are because of that. And it's, one of my regrets.
It's interesting, but anybody who's like under 15 or so wasn't alive when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard to wrap your head around that, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. They don't
what's
know.
What's 9/11?
Yeah, I've never seen a CD player, never seen a VHS player,
typewriter,
never seen a Walkman, a typewriter. It's really wild stuff. It's really crazy stuff. So I love the story about Julia Child with a growth mindset, and I guess when you think about a growth mindset for Julia, is it because she was told she couldn't go into the army, and she had to pivot and do something else. Then she went into the OSS. Then she pivoted and did something else. Then she got into cooking. She got her show. It seems like throughout her life, she was told no quite a few times. Or even when she had her show, I think she was told no a lot. Like, nobody's going to want to watch this. This is not going to be, successful, blah, blah, blah. So she got told no a lot. And she did a very good job of turning those no's into opportunities and trying to figure out, how to create that opportunity from the challenges in front of her.
That is another recurring theme that, frankly, I don't know of an example in the 200 interviews of someone who just went on this, perfect path that picked something early, got the great education. Everybody positively reinforced his or her dreams. Yeah. and, threaded the needle, went to Ivy League, went to McKinsey, invented this thing, became this philanthropist. That's a bullshit story.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, a lot of the CEO interviews that I've done, either they've come from poverty, they had troubled childhoods, they had to overcome extreme challenges. Even right now I'm reading Sam Waltman's book, the creator of Walmart, and I'm reading Bob Iger's documentary as well. And, regardless of what you think of Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney today, but back in the day, like throughout his career, these people worked incredibly hard. They went through crazy challenges in the business world. And it's fascinating to see those things because there are these huge, massive companies, but we don't spend enough time thinking about, well, how did they get to that point? We just, we just see them as where they are now.
One of the things that I learned, I didn't necessarily discuss this in the book, but
those are the best stories.
When people look at an Apple or a Google or a Microsoft or a Facebook or whatever, they think, oh my God, these visionary people, they had these plans for worldwide domination. And, Stephen was in the mid-70s. They knew they would have a computer, a music player, a phone, a tablet, retail, Genius Bar, App Store. They had it all figured out, right?
Yeah.
Total BS, right? So Stephen was were trying to make $20 motherboards for a computer club. And fast forward, 30, 40 years, it's a multi-trillion dollar company making all this stuff.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're trying to write this PowerPoint for worldwide domination, and they're trying to not just boil the ocean. They're trying to boil the ocean in multiple universes. Let's just boil 1 cup of water to start. Okay.
Yep. Next up, we have a clip from Dr. Amy Edmondson. I've had her on the show. I think it was earlier this year. She's also one of the people that I interviewed for my recent book, Leading with Vulnerability. And in this clip, she's going to be talking about how intelligent failures can actually be a springboard for innovation and growth. She had a fairly new book come out as well. And so the clip that you're about to listen to is going to be sharing insights from that brand new book that she released in 2024. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the importance of psychological safety in fostering an environment where team members really feel empowered to experiment and learn from their mistakes. So let's dive a little bit deeper into how you can encourage and focus on intelligent failures with Dr. Amy Edmondson. Then it sounds like for people who are listening and watching, the idea is you want to avoid basic failures. You want to avoid complex failures. It's not to say that you want intelligent failures, but from the 3 types of failures, the intelligent ones are the ones that you can actually learn from. And...
Right. Well, you can learn from all of them.
Okay.
Right? We can always learn from our failures, right? But you don't want them, right? But you can still learn from. Please do learn from them, right? Because if you have them, and you probably still will keep having them, you might as well learn from them.
Yeah.
Like, get all the value you can from them. But I'll say, for intelligent failures, in fact, it's not bad advice to say, let's have more of them. Because if you're not having enough of them, you're not pushing the envelope. You're not stretching. You're not doing what a former boss of mine said, playing to win, right? You're not going for it. Like, you're playing it safe.
Okay, so between all the different types of failures, the one that you want are intelligent failures.
Yep.
And then kind of getting back to this theme of psychological safety and failure, would it be safe to say that in organizations where you don't have psychological safety, you'll see more basic and complex failures and less intelligent failures?
I think it is safe to say that.
Okay.
Because one of the major causes of basic and complex failures alike is people not speaking up when they see something wrong, right? Or they see something that may end up producing a failure, and it's just they're afraid to speak up. They don't want to tell the boss. They don't want to, they don't want to look bad. So, and psychological safety describes a context where they will take that interpersonal risk of speaking up. So many of the failures I have studied could quite directly have been in organizations, have been avoided had people been able to speak up earlier in the process.
Okay. And what would be the relationship between this idea of failure and vulnerability? So I think you touched on it in a couple of different points in the book. And, obviously I interviewed you for my book on leading with vulnerability, which is, bringing together the competence and the connection piece in there. But what is the relationship in your book between mistakes, or I should say failures? I'm not going to use mistakes anymore. And
no, mistakes is okay. Like, we'll make those too. I promise. There's the chapter 2 is called, chapter 3 is called "To Err is Human," right? No. It's that old phrase. Like, we don't want to make mistakes. We want to do our very best to minimize them, but we have to accept that that's part of being vulnerable is to accept that you will make mistakes. The way I talk about vulnerability most often is as follows. Vulnerability is a fact. Each and every one of us is a fallible human being living in a very complex, fallible world. And so we're vulnerable. Like, by definition, if you woke up this morning, you're vulnerable. And so the real question, like the emotional question, the wisdom question is, are you okay with that? Right? If you're okay with the fact of your vulnerability, you will show up differently for others, right? You will just show up as someone who isn't trying to show off all the time or trying to look perfect or be seen as someone who has never made a mistake in her life, right? So you'll be more willing to kind of deal with the reality of our vulnerability.
Don't you not have a choice though when you say, like, be okay with it? Like, life doesn't care if you're okay with it or not. It's just, like you say, a fact of life. So what if you're not okay with it, or is it more of not willing to acknowledge it?
Yeah, I think it's both. Maybe the way I'm thinking about not being okay with it is it's a sort of denial mechanism. It's you're just keeping it at bay. You're unwilling to look at it. And so you're trying to act as if it's not there, which I think is hard work and maybe even gets in the way. In fact, I'm sure it gets in the way of really clear thinking, and certainly gets in the way of other orientation, being curious and interested in and present for other people.
Do you have any examples or stories that come to mind for the intelligent failure? I think, wasn't Rene Redzepi? He was actually one of the people I interviewed on my podcast as well, from NOMA, and probably a lot of people are not familiar with his story. It's really a crazy story with him. And I think even the show on Hulu, The Bear, the main character is supposed to be somebody who worked at NOMA for Rene Redzepi, although it's not explicitly stated. Can you share a little bit about that story? And am I correct? And that's kind of the intelligent failure category?
Yeah, it's in the intelligent failure chapter, and I talk about his story and his restaurant Noma, and as he embodies the kind of elite failure practitioner idea, where you're really at the leading edge of your craft, and if you're there, guess what? There will be failures. And so it's funny because he didn't start out okay with failure. Yeah. He started out and his all of the young chefs, aspiring chefs in his kitchen and in his restaurant were quite terrified of him. And he was really tough if they experimented with a dish and brought it forward and it wasn't exquisite. He would not have the most positive, supportive response, and
it would be a lot of it's okay. You tried. It would be
right. You tried, or or this is it's interesting, and all the rest. So, but he gradually learned that without failures, but and fortunately behind closed doors, you don't do that. You don't serve your real guests the failed dishes. You serve them the ones that worked out. And so he learned that if we can't do this behind closed doors, we can't be innovative. And he started to really almost preach the failure gospel and write. He started writing about it in his own journal and describing sort of, almost the fun of trying things on the absolute leading edges of what were possible, and some will work and some won't, and really starting to say this is the secret sauce of our success is our ability to fail well, again, behind closed doors. But then he got to a situation where he was having failure of another kind, which is hadn't managed the finances very well, and was sort of in a big sea of red ink, and had to pause and figure out, where did we go wrong, and where did this come from? How was it that we weren't able to actually make money doing what we do? But I sorted that out too. So I think success in the sort of leading edge of any domain is going to come with different kinds of failures along the way.
And for people not familiar with him, he won the world's best chef several years. His restaurant, Noma,
Best restaurant. Yeah.
world's best restaurant. I think it was like 4 or 5 times, to the point where they actually had to change the rules so that he couldn't even win anymore because he kept winning so much. So it's really a crazy story. And then, isn't it also true? Like he kept, I think he was telling me every year, every 2 years, they like close down the restaurant, they shut everything down, and they go open up pop-ups in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And he recently announced, right, in 2024, they're just closing for good. They're done.
At the end of 2024, they'll close for good. And then he's going to pivot to a kind of internet-based business for innovation in cuisine. So we don't know exactly what that means, but stay tuned.
Yeah, that'll be pretty cool. So failure is, something that we all experience, we all go through. And some people, I find, are able to look at that failure and turn it into a positive experience. And other people look at that failure as a reason for why they should never do it again. What do you think the key difference is? Like, how can we take failures that we experience and turn them into these learning moments and positives, instead of using these failures as pivotal moments that define why we can't move ahead and can't do anything else?
Well, I hesitate to call it, a sort of a trait that you're born with, because I don't think it is. I think all little kids are fine. You learn to walk, you fall, you
exactly
learn again, you learn to ride a bike, right? This is sort of we're naturally able to do this. But by the time you're a working adult, or even a middle schooler in elementary school or middle school, you've internalized a kind of cultural belief that you have to get things right, not wrong, that there's right answers, and the cool kids are the ones who succeed, don't fail. So we internalize these messages, and then we get rigid, and then we get afraid. But I think the best answer to your question, like what does it take, is probably the number one thing that matters is a growth mindset, referring to like what Carol Dweck terms growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, right? Which is a kind of a belief that your capabilities are a work in progress. They're something that you can improve through stretching. Through you get smarter as you take on challenging goals, and you learn from your failures. You get more athletic as you run or do whatever sport you like to do. So this idea that I can't fail, I can only learn and grow, and you internalize it to be something that you actually believe. And I have 2 sons. One of them was a little bit more instinctively this way from an early age, right? He just was always sort of, tell me what I did wrong so I can get better. And you're like, wow, really? That's what you want? Okay, yeah, I can help you with that, right? So he seemed to have a little bit of an intrinsic advantage in that sense, but I think it can be learned by all of us. I think another aspect is a kind of supportive community, whether that's your team or your family or your or friendship group, right? A community that kind of rewards this type of thinking and acting, and that rewards the sharing, right? Because we don't have to have all our failures ourselves. We can have some of them vicariously. If you tell me something you tried and it didn't work, then I don't have to try that.
There's kind of one, I don't know if you'd call it a framework, but you had kind of a breakdown of the failure landscape in there. and you talked about predictable and basic, variable and complex, and novel and intelligent. And I really liked you had like the nice chart in there that broke all these things down. I think it was 9 quadrants.
Yep.
So what is that? And why is
Sure.
that so important for people to know? Because obviously we have the 3 archetypes of failures, which to me,
Right.
it seems like whenever a failure does occur,
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
why the...
I mean, the 3 archetypes matter, but I think one of the real competencies that you need, to sort of master this stuff is context awareness. Now, this is so simple, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but there's really 2 key dimensions. Right? One is, you used this word before, how much uncertainty is there? Because there are domains, like if I'm going to go down and make a tray of chocolate chip cookies later today, I can almost guarantee that the result will be fine. Right? I'm just going to follow the recipe. I'm going to put the oven at the right. It's just, there's almost zero uncertainty there.
And you would give me one of those chocolate chip cookies, I'm assuming.
I'll give you one. I'll save you one. And so, so how much uncertainty is there? Because the more uncertainty, the more possibility there is for failure. Just logically true.
Yep.
Right? And then the other important dimension, again, so crazy, so simple, is what's at stake. Right. And when you say what's at stake, like what are we putting at risk if we try something that might not work out? And that can be financial, reputational, or human safety. Right. And so, obviously if like human life is at stake, we want to be a lot more cautious than if we're just, playing a game in our basement. Right. So sizing up the context is something that elite failure practitioners do effortlessly. The rest of us can sort of think it through, but if we're in a sort of very high stakes setting, we've got to proceed cautiously, very thoughtfully. If we're in a really well understood setting, and so the diagram, the 9-cell diagram you brought up, basically makes the point that in known territory, like very consistent, recognizable context where there's recipes for getting the result, most common failure that you're likely to make is a basic failure, right? You make a mistake, you do it in your sleep. Nope, you shouldn't do things in your sleep. You should pay attention, be mindful, right? You do it in your sleep, you make a mistake, and you get a bad outcome. The most sort of prototypical failure type in a complex setting, like an operating room or in aviation, would be a complex failure where multiple factors come together, just the wrong way. And the typical type of failure in brand new, uncertain, unknown territory would be an intelligent failure, right? Because you're thoughtfully experimenting. But if you think about it a little further, it becomes clear that you can make a basic failure in a lab. Right? You just, you accidentally mix up the wrong chemicals. You take the wrong chemical off the shelf to do your experiment, and you don't get the result you want. It wasn't because your hypothesis was wrong. It's because you made a kind of a dumb mistake.
Yeah.
So it exists. It's a possibility. But I call these, and you can have an intelligent failure in a very routine. You can vary that recipe to see whether it actually tastes better. You have good reason to believe it might, but it comes out not as good, right? So that was an intelligent failure, worth trying. Could have been great, right? It could have been the dish of the year. So I found it fun actually to think of examples in all 9 cells, and just to make the point that in a way, part of the expertise here is to master not only awareness of the failure types, but also awareness of the context, and then again, we have this invitation to do as best we can to avoid the preventable and complex failures, no matter where we are, through vigilance, through training, through teamwork, and to push ourselves to have more of the intelligent failures, especially in new territory, but possibly anywhere.
How does trust play into this? And I have a couple of trust questions for you, but
okay.
I'm really interested, for example, in the intersection of trust and vulnerability, trust and mistakes, trust, psychological safety. It seems like trust comes up in everything. So
it's true.
For failure, I would imagine that the more trust you have, or the more trust a team has amongst each other and with their leaders, the more of the intelligent failures you would see. Whereas if there's not a lot of trust, maybe you would see more of the basic or complex, because people aren't speaking up. They're not sharing. They're not talking about what they've learned. They're just, trying to hide things. So I don't know.
And they're anxious, right? They're anxious. And so they might be more at risk for making mistakes.
Yeah, so
I think that's right.
How does trust play a role in failure?
Trust is such a big, it's such a big word. It means at least three different things. Like one being, do I trust your intentions? Do I expect that you will behave, in a trustworthy way, as you said you would? Right. And another very different meaning is, do I trust your competence? Now, that has no character aspersion at all. Maybe you just haven't been doing this activity very long, or you haven't had as much training in this activity as I would need you to have to fully trust you to do this use this challenging piece of equipment or something. So I think there's relationships on both of those dimensions with failure, right? Because if I decide to trust you prematurely to do something without supervision that probably I shouldn't have, and that's on me, it's my error, I might have just inadvertently led to the causing of a failure that could have been avoided. If you're talking that interpersonal trust you were talking about before, I think the more of it, the better. Right? The more we're willing to be transparent and honest with each other, and believe strongly that you won't hold it against me, that I have these shortcomings, or that I had to ask you this dumb question, or, that I admitted something didn't seem to be working over here, right? Then we're going to be a more robust, safe, failure-proof team than if we didn't have that trust, that interpersonal trust.
What do Tractor Supply, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of other companies all have in common? They are all a part of the Future of Work Leaders community. This is a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a Chief Human or Chief People Officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Last up, we have John R. Miles, who's the author of a fantastic book called Passion Struck. He's also the host of a podcast by the same name. And in this clip, John shares valuable insights on how high achievers actually unlock their potential and navigate their careers with intentionality. And that word intentionality is really, really important, because so many of us, myself included, many years ago, we kind of just drifted around and floated around and hoped our careers would take shape. But in this clip, he's going to talk about how you can actually develop and create that career path for you with intention. He introduces us to a model which consists of mindset shifts, behavior shifts, and the crucial role of intrinsic motivation. And so whether you are a seasoned leader, a new graduate, someone looking to make a significant change, John's strategies, I think, are going to really help give you a roadmap for how you can create a purpose-driven life and career. So let's jump right into this episode with John R. Miles.
Behavior shifts, what I call the psychology of progress or deliberate action, and then it's all surrounded by the fuel of intrinsic motivation. So the mindset shifts you can think of as our why influencing how we approach challenges and opportunities. Our behavior shifts are really the what, and it's a direct reflection of our mindset dictating how we pursue our goals. And then the deliberate action is really the when and the where that we apply it. And as I mentioned, the intrinsic motivation then becomes the fuel that brings all of this into a continuous loop.
Okay, and so let's start off with the mindsets. So it seems like, actually, even before we get into that, so this model is really to be used for anybody, it seems like, who is trying to figure out maybe what they should be doing, or how do you recommend people apply this model? I mean, if you have things figured out in your career, you know what you want to do, you're on that path, is this model still relevant for you, or is it really just for people who are struggling, trying to figure out where they belong, where they fit in, what their purpose is, and where their careers should go?
That's a great question. And there are really four audiences for this. The first was for high achievers who maybe are plateauing or trying to figure out how they make that next jump, to give them tools in the toolkit to do so. Another major group was for new college graduates, people just entering the workforce, to kind of give them a map of how to create an intentional, purpose, passion struck life. Another
Okay.
group are people who feel stuck where they are and need to go from being stuck to passion struck. And then a fourth one that I wrote it for were athletes who might be at a level where they find themselves plateauing and they're looking for keys that can go help them go from being average at what they're doing to become great at it. So those are kind of the four groups that I had in mind.
I learned something really crazy today. 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed to the channel. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It'll help the channel grow, and you'll also get notified when new videos just like this one on leadership are available. And now, let's get back to the content. Okay, and I would say most people probably fit into one of those categories. So the mindsets, we probably won't get into all the mindsets here, and maybe I'll ask you to pick, let's say, two or three that you love the most. But let me just read what some of the mindsets are. Mission Angler, which is muster the power to do something great. Brand Reinventor, never being afraid to reinvent yourself. Mosquito Auditor, which is avoid the most dangerous animal on the planet. Fear Confronter, realizing that you are your biggest competitor. Perspective Harnesser, zoom out and tap into its power. Action Creator, permit yourself to dream the dream. So when you think of all those mindsets, if let's say we were to pick two of them to start, which two mindsets do you think are most relevant for people that have corporate jobs? Or which ones are you most passionate about?
Okay, I'll start out with the mosquito auditor because I think this is a great one for someone who's in a corporate position. And the ironic thing,
Okay.
Jacob, is when I originally wrote the book, I wrote this for more of a business audience, and the publisher wanted to be tweaked so that it was more for the individual. So I can go either direction on these because I originally
Okay.
wrote it through the lens of a business customer or a business reader. So I ended up coming up with this mosquito auditor principle. And when I write, I find my inspiration during times of mindfulness, and my way I like to do it the most is to somehow or another get out into nature. I happened to be on a walk this day and I was thinking about this chapter. As you mentioned, the book starts with the whole idea of becoming a mission angler, which is really life crafting the life that you want. It then goes into once you do that, you need to start reinventing yourself and that brand that you have. And then the third thing that we typically get impacted by is invisible influences. So, as I was thinking about these invisible influences, and Jonah Berger wrote a great book on this, um, I happened to be hearing this radio show, and the announcer was talking about the most dangerous animal on the planet. And he was asking the audience to give who they thought it was. And I was listening and I was coming up with the same answers everyone else was. The dangerous animals they have in Australia are the great white shark. And it turns out I wasn't even remotely close, nor were any of the other listeners. It turns out that a mosquito is more deadly than all the sharks in the world will be over 100 years. I mean, it kills between 1 million to 2 million people every single year. It's just staggering the impact that these mosquitoes have. And yet,
Hmm.
most of the time, they're invisible. We might hear their buzzing, but it's not until we get bitten that we really take notice. And even then, we continue to allow them to be around us and we don't take precautions. And as I was thinking about this, the same thing goes with human mosquitoes that are in our lives, these invisible influences. And you could look at this as either people in your life, which I'll orient it towards, but they could be activities or other things that you're doing that are taking you farther and farther away from where you want to be. So I tried to make this a fun metaphor. So I came up with three types of mosquitoes to make this pretty easy for someone to diagnose them. The first one I call the bloodsucker. And so this is that boundary destroyer who wants every ounce of blood that they can take from you. The second one
Hmm.
I call the invisible suffocator, and these are the pessimist or the glass half full type of people who are in your life. It's like that uncle who we just got through Christmas, but you're having Christmas dinner with them. You tell them about this new amazing job opportunity you get, and he starts going into all the negatives about it and why it's going to be a negative instead of a positive in your life. And then the third, I call the pitas, which are really those pieces of work or pain in the asses that infiltrate our lives and we just seem to allow in and can't permanently swat them out. So those are the three main mosquito types that I talk about. And the way I think you can apply this is to start thinking about your professional career. I mean, it can go deeper than that into your personal career, but let's just think about your professional career and imagine that you're shooting archery and you've got that target in front of you. I would just simply start going into that and start going through the first three concentric circles of that target, put 5 people who influence you on a daily basis into each grouping, and then start going through and applying this mosquito audit to them and determine
Hmm.
if any of those descriptions. And I'm guaranteeing you they likely will. So then it becomes once you have identified them, it gives you a great opportunity because now that you recognize that invisible influence in your life, you can do something about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. So I think the second two are more self-explanatory. That right, there was I don't even remember the names of them. I remember the bloodsucker was the first one, which is what I wanted to ask you to get a little bit deeper on. The third one was just kind of a general pain. And what was the second type of mosquito again?
The invisible suffocator.
Ah, yes, the invisible suffocator. um, Tell me a little bit about the bloodsucker because I have a feeling a lot of people might say, "Oh, that's my manager, that's my leader," or maybe even the suffocator, right? I imagine the micromanager that's coming to you, that's constantly, "What's going on with this? What's going?" on? And you just feel so overwhelmed and flustered. And I suppose maybe even sometimes I could be that mosquito every now and then with my team, but I'm really interested in the bloodsucker. Is this the one that's constantly just trying to take from you without giving, without reciprocating value or sharing, or helping you in any way? They're just trying to benefit themselves nonstop.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great way to represent this is a peer in your circle who you constantly are helping out and they're taking everything from you that they possibly can, propelling themselves forward, but give nothing back in return. And
Ah,
ultimately, what they're looking to try to do is to propel themselves over you when that next job opportunity comes. I mean, that's just one example,
mm,
but it
yeah,
could be it could be a customer that you're working with who, although you've got tons of other customers that you're working with, feels that they're entitled to be the one who gets all the attention, gets to extract everything that they feel that they deserve from you, but isn't reciprocating back in the same way your other customers might.
yeah. It's funny. We have in our circle of friends, and we moved to Los Angeles a few years ago. So but from here originally. And we have I'd say pretty good circle of friends here. And the circle of friends keeps getting bigger as new people get introduced. And there have been several times where we would get together with the circle of friends, and there's new people who get brought in, and they always say, "Oh, do you know so and so?" And I would say, "Yeah, yeah, I know so and so." And they're like, "Oh man, that person," and they never have anything nice to say about this person. And it's precisely because a lot of people view this person as somebody who only wants to know you or be your friend or be in your circle if they can benefit from you. And as soon as they realize they can't benefit from you, this person has the reputation of kind of abandoning you and just leaving you and not wanting to be your friend and not wanting to socialize or engage with you. And so I think a lot of people know who this person is, right? In your company, I'm sure if a lot of employees went and asked their peers, like, who is the bloodsucker at our company? A lot of people would be like, oh, it's Jim in accounting, or it's Sally in operations. Like, people know who that bloodsucker is pretty well. When you get this type of a mosquito in your life, or any mosquito, for example, in your life, and you know that person is there, do you have any advice on recourse for what to do? Because in a corporate environment, you're not gonna off your boss. Do you confront them? Do you talk to them about it? Do you try to switch teams? What do you do if you're stuck with one of those types of mosquitoes as a leader?
In this particular example of the boundary destroyer, since you know they're manipulative and you know that they're likely going to go away when you don't give them what they want, part of the way that you can handle that situation is to do just that, is to realize what they're after and to slowly but surely extract yourself from being that person who keeps giving them what they want. Because as you explained, the more you do that and the more that they're not getting something from you, they will slowly back away and eventually start trying to take it from someone else who they think they can manipulate. But all three of them, it really comes down to you setting personal boundaries. And it just becomes, depending on who the relationship with, how subtly or how forcefully that you are able to set those boundaries. The most important thing that I think people get wrong is they might start setting the boundaries, but then they're not consistent with it. And with that lack of consistency, it opens up the door for the influences to just keep coming back. And it actually can make it even worse than it was the first time. So you've got to recognize it. You've got to figure out what approach and boundary setting technique you want to use. And then you've got to be very consistent at applying it.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this special episode of some of our top future-ready leadership lessons from 2024. I also encourage you to go back and listen to these full episodes. They're super easy to find on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred player is. Just type in Jacob Morgan and the name of the guest, or just type in the name of the guest. Should be super easy to find. So today we looked at a couple of really interesting insights, whether it was from Guy Kawasaki talking about developing a growth mindset, Amy Edmondson talking about intelligent failures, or John R. Miles talking about how to really create a career with intentionality. These are all crucial lessons as we wrap up the year and get ready to ring in 2025. And remember that the path to being a future-ready leader is not linear. There is a lot of challenges that you're going to go through. There's continuous learning, adaptation, and yes, even failing forward. So keep these lessons in mind as we close out 2024. We'll do another handful of these types of episodes to wrap up the year, where I'm going to be sharing some of the most popular and insightful clips from 2024. Until then, stay curious, stay motivated, and above all, future ready. I'll see you soon.